Everybody awake today? Hello, Rockfest. Okay, if we can have everybody stand up. Come on, everyone stand up for a second. All right, here we go. Now we're going to do, actually sit back down. I was just kidding. I wanted to see if you would do it and to make sure that you're awake. I'm Scott, and I have a question for you. How many of you guys remember your first modern band training? Okay, I'm just going to take about 3 minutes up here to introduce this panel, but the reason I wanted you to remember your first modern band training is because remember how it started? What did we do first? We played music, right? And then we played more music. And then we played a lot more music. And then after playing a lot of music, like, 3/4 through the day, we talked about what we were doing and why we did it. I'm hoping that you guys will see today's panel like that. We've been playing music for 2 days now. And now I think it's really important to think about why we're doing this and how we're doing this. So here's my little story, anecdote, thinking about Little Kids Rock. So it started with a man who had a vision, Dave Wish. You guys know him, right? And it was like just a guitar program for little kids, right? Just a little program after school. And it was a guitar program. And then he started training teachers, but he started training non-music teachers. I was at the first music teacher training he ever did in 2004. And at that point, there was Dave running around just being an amazingly fun, energetic guy. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is a way to get kids excited about playing. And as it grew, we added piano and then modern band. And then we are a decade later, and we're thinking, wow, how do we really make this scalable? If we're always teaching teachers and teachers are retiring or leaving and new people are coming in not getting trained, what happens then? So then we start reaching out to the higher ed. Then we start reaching out to the higher ed community. And so now we have music teachers that are being trained as well as general teachers. And then we're in the higher ed community. And I remember because one of the first things we ever did with them was I went to the University of Miami. And we were going to have somebody on this panel that was in that very first class where we had a bunch of graduate students. And we went up there, we presented. I think it was me and Brian. We presented for like an hour. At the end of it, they said, this is amazing. This is fun. But then what? And we looked at each other and we're like, what do you mean then what? He's like, well, this is super engaging, and kids are having fun. They're playing music. But how are you assessing them? How is this skill-based learning working on this? Where's the scope and sequence for this? How about a kid that starts Little Kids Rock in kindergarten and by the 12th grade is still doing Little Kids Rock programs? Because they have the ability to do that in orchestra, and they have the ability to do that in band and in choir. And we had to really think about that, and we started really expanding it. So that's a lot of what we're doing, and what you've been seeing is taking it from the itty-bitty stage and moving it bigger. And we're going to a lot of these universities now and finding out how to do that. But we're also going other places. Like last year, we went to Australia and hung out with a bunch of Australians to do that. Like 6 years ago, when Dave and I went over to meet with a couple people in the UK and go see a lot of their programs, and then they came back here. Because we think this is not something that America has solved perfectly. And it has nothing to do with America or not, but we understand this is a global, this is a world, and there's countries doing music education differently everywhere. And if we really hope as teachers to get to the point where we can say, hey, this is more than fun. This is something that can skill build, can be lifelong learning, can constantly be progressively better and better for kids from day one to the end, and it's still fun, which we believe it can be, that's what we're going to do. So one of the biggest commitments we made to doing this is hiring a director of higher education. And rather than stealing all of his time, I'm just going to hand it over to him, Mr. Brian Powell.
Thank you, Scott. Yes, so all the things that Scott said, just pretend that I also just said them to reinforce them. I don't want to spend any more time than we need to, because as you can see from the empty chairs, we have a lot of folks. And as we were thinking through whom to invite and how do we feature this, it was just kind of like, well, we have to feature that perspective because they were a grad student and now they're doing it. And we have to feature this perspective because they're doing research on modern band, and we have to feature this one, and it just kept going. And so without any further ado, please welcome our esteemed panelists, and I will introduce them as they speak. We can give them a round of applause now. It's like a beauty pageant. They're all... Ken would be the winner, I think. Yes. I'm going to sit here, yes. It's fine. Uh-huh. Yeah, musical chairs. This is good. All right, fantastic. This is great. So we're going to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to just briefly introduce the panelists, and then I want them to share a little bit about who they are, what their deal is, what are they doing, maybe what brought them to Rockfest, and then they're each going to get just a couple minutes to talk about some of the work that they're doing, maybe what brought them to Rockfest, some things, connections, and then once we get to the end, then we'll have some opportunity for a little discussion as a group, and then if there's time, we'll do some questions from the audience. So we are going to start with, immediately to my left, Dr. Cassandra Eisenreich, who is at Slippery Rock University, and she is on the music ed faculty and the flute faculty there. And thank you for joining us. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about what brought you to Rockfest, and because you've been here before.
So,
Turn it on.
oh,
Sorry.
That didn't work either. Hello? Okay. So thanks, Brian. I'm really excited to be here. This is my third Rockfest. It's very exciting. About 4 years ago, I was in a position at the University of Miami. I was the program and outreach coordinator, and that's actually how I met Brian and Ryan. And Scott actually had my first kind of little kids rock introduction on the phone with Ryan, and then meeting with Scott, and that kind of fast forward maybe 3 years, and wait, not 3 years. Let me think about this. So, sorry, I'm like, all right. So when I was in Miami, I met them, and
Is Miami in the house, by the way?
Yeah. And then I came to Pennsylvania, where I'm now teaching at Slippery Rock University, which is a very different setting. So in Miami, I was working at Overtown and in basically just right in the city. And all of the background that I had in music ed, when I started teaching in Miami, I couldn't go in there singing Lucy Lockett Lost Her Pocket and think that I could, really connect with the students. And so that's when I really started to look into popular music and what everyone here is doing. And so fast forward to my job at Slippery Rock, it's about an hour away from the city, and most of my students have never had an experience in an urban setting. And so I thought, I have to do what we were doing in Miami and bring it to Slippery Rock. And so Brian came out and did a one-day class, and everyone was super inspired by it, and I started implementing it in my music education for diverse learners class. And that class is a part, we talk a lot about culturally relevant music. I just got it as a part of the curriculum. Brian came out and did a one-week class on the books as popular music pedagogy, modern band in the classroom. And so we're really trying to get things moving in Pittsburgh and make sure that our students are prepared to work in any setting that they might find themselves in. So that's my story.
Thank you. Yes, thank you, Cassandra. And it's also, I know we've been rockfesting and it's the morning, but it's also appropriate when they say things like we were able to get it as an approved course that students are now taking at the university. We can applaud for those sort of things because, because even a couple years ago, if we could get modern band talked about in one college or university, that was this really exciting thing. So we're seeing a lot of progress. Speaking of progress, next we have Candace Davenport. She is the area coordinator for music education at Florida International University. Any FIU people? There's the one. Amazing. Candace, if you can just kind of talk a little bit about your journey from grad student experience modern band to now implementing it and what you're seeing in Miami, that would be lovely, in 3 minutes or less.
Sure, and go. So actually, I was a doctoral student while Cassandra was, she was faculty at Miami, and I was also working with her with outreach and kind of being that middle person to kind of help coach new teachers, but putting them in these very challenging settings. And so we ended up having the Little Kids Rock guys come and do a workshop at Miami, and it was just instant, yes, this is the kind of thing that we need to be giving for our teachers, because the lay of the land, I know in most of the US, and they're gonna speak to our international perspectives, but you might find yourself, in a situation where you're trained to teach band, but now you're teaching choir, and you're teaching elementary, and you're teaching all of these things, because that's what's happening. And so how do we make music relevant? How do we keep that 80% that we're losing by the time they graduate. And so this is one of the many, many ways that that's happening. And to me, that spoke to me anyway. I was already philosophically on this mindset through technology, and so this just fit. And at Florida International University, I've been privileged enough to have the support where I can say, oh, we're going to completely revamp this curriculum and make it progressive. So now we've already begun to add Little Kids Rock into the syllabi, into the methodology courses, and other things as well, but now we're actually going to integrate a progressive pedagogy course within this for both undergraduates and graduates, and just really breaking down this idea of what is music education today. It's not the big three anymore. It's the big three plus this and plus that and plus this. So that's really the direction where we're going. So my journey actually was graduate student into doctor, and now I'm disseminating that to my students. So they're all gonna get a taste of that.
Thank you. And you know, she touched a little bit on it. What we're seeing is these students who are doing student-teacher placements in modern band settings, are they themselves getting jobs and then coming to Little Kids Rock workshops and building programs, and then they host student teachers. And this is kind of the ecosystem that helps build modern band to be bigger than just Little Kids Rock and bigger than just a city, and it has this kind of life of its own, which is really exciting. So next up, we have David Williams from USF.
Hey now, hang on.
David couldn't join us today, unfortunately, but he sent in his stead a younger, thinner version of himself.
Still balding.
And,
Still balding, though.
you said it, I didn't. So this is Jonathan Clatter, and I first met Jonathan when Scott and I were down doing some work at USF, and he was doing his doctoral research there, and he was in iPad bands, and he was doing very cool things. And if you're familiar with the program at University of South Florida, I'm not going to go into it. USF, go Bulls, I believe. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, doing cool things. And so Jonathan is this coming year going to be at Ithaca College, which is exciting because they're a very strong partner in the modern band movement as well. So Jonathan, if you can just kind of talk to us a little bit about that experience as a graduate student.
Absolutely.
Doing
Good morning. There's some USFers over there, I heard. Go Bulls, right? Yeah, I'm a little younger than David Williams, but I'm here and nonetheless excited to be here. Yeah, I've spent my last 3 years at the graduate program at USF and been integrated into what is going on there in the curriculum. It's been really exciting to see, and David Williams is just phenomenal at what he does there as far as changing things for the better to include band, orchestra, and choir, but then what she was saying too, plus all these other things. And so it really starts in the Foundations of Music Education course that begins there. Students come in very traditionally mindseted, and we try to expand very gently their horizons and philosophically challenge them to think about music education being more than just band, orchestra, and choir. We get a lot of different types of attitudes from students in that area, but they do eventually grapple and kind of embrace that idea through that class. And in that class and through all the curriculum is this idea of learner-centered pedagogy. And so we have students break into groups in various different activities throughout the class through Foundations, as well as a new class that was just implemented called Progressive Music Education Methods, which has a 2-course or 2-semester sequence where students are basically very heavily involved with playing guitars, comping on keyboards. It's all very oral. There's very little as far as notation goes, so students are looking at YouTubes, they're emulating it from YouTube themselves, and then they're in small groups. So they form the groups themselves, they play in the bands, they actually perform on campus with the songs that they've covered, and we actually try to we're now just going the route of doing songwriting, so they're actually involved in songwriting as well, so writing lyrics and all that as well. So yeah, the whole course there, the curriculum has really gone through a significant shift. It's been really exciting to see how a lot of the students have grabbed onto it, and they get excited about it. I think coming in, they're not as excited, but once they get into it, they realize that the positive outcomes from this curriculum. So yeah, so we've got Foundations of Music Education, really challenge them there, very learner-centered, and we go to Progressive Methods 1 and 2, with its ensemble course, which we called, or has been called, the Creative Performance Chamber Ensemble. Chamber was a very important part of that word, so that the music faculty agreed that would be something that could be accepted there. They didn't even blink an eye, actually, at that. They thought, that sounds awesome, let's do it. And then we've actually included music technology for educators as well, very learner-centered, same type of thing. So students are involved with GarageBand and iPads, Audacity, a whole lot of other technology, and they basically are doing one-on-one projects and some group work as well. There's also some film scoring in that class as well, so they get some sense of what that looks like, and it's very, very surface level. It doesn't go too deep, but it does get them exposed to it so they can use it in their future teaching as well. And then the last final component, trying to keep it short here for you, is the new class. It's called Keyboard for Music Educators. So typically in a music education coursework, you'll take very traditional notation. Here's treble clef, here's bass clef, left hand, right hand, which I struggled so bad at. But we got through it. So this class is very different. It includes more chords. So they have lyric sheets with chords in front, and they learn voicings. They do get into, it's taught by a jazz professor, so he does get into 7s and 9s and 11s to kind of like throw them right into some of the heaviest stuff right away. But it's very oral based as well. So that's what's going on at USF. Thank you.
And is there an update you can give us about David Williams?
He is now a grandpa.
When he called and said, my daughter might go into birth and I don't feel like I can come to Colorado, I said, how selfish can you be? But yeah, so we're immensely excited for Dr. Williams and totally understand why he couldn't join us. A quick side note before we go into what radio does. One of the values I think about learning about programs that are embracing modern band is we work with students. And these students are finding a love for what we do, and then they look to maybe do something similar in college, and oftentimes there aren't opportunities for them. And maybe some of the schools that we know about that have popular music programs are private and they can't afford them, and this is a very real struggle. And so the more that we can do interesting things and integrate with our higher ed institutions, I think the more tools in our toolbox we have for when we're advising our students of, are there careers, if I want to be a music teacher and I want to do something like that looks like modern band, are there schools where I can have this experience? And so USF is one of them, FIU is one of them, Slippery Rock University is one of them, and one, our transition now is a school that we've been working with a long time, and that's Ithaca College. Any IC grads? Thank you. I think there's 3. Yeah, no, that's great. And Ithaca, just a quick backstory, and then we head over to radio, has something like 350 music ed majors, over 600 students in the School of Music there, and it's a great, proud music program, and so for us to have a real strong foothold there is really exciting, and I'll turn it over to radio to talk a little bit about some of the work we're doing.
This is great, and I'm so happy to be here. And for me to stand here and share with, there's esteemed people in the panel. Thank you. My thought here that would be interesting is, yes, Ithaca does a lot of the things, mainly and due to the part that I think Brian likes to go to Florida and find people and then bring modern band to the planet. And so I'm originally from Miami. We can go ahead and say woo again. Yeah. And I still think Miami is so good that I can never say that I'm not in Miami. So I am in 2 places always. Anyhow, it's important to, I think, look a little bit at the roots. So, I came out of a context where I played and learned music on my own. In fact, I found out from a colleague of mine that this person also had an incident once where a ball hit him in the mouth and he could no longer play the brass instrument, the reeded instrument. I played the brass instrument. And that was in junior high school, so I wound up being kind of situated outside the boundaries of the risers with the kids in the band. And it gave me a different perspective. I became kind of like an assistant to the teacher, a keyboard player in the choir, that kind of thing. And as I came up and said, I'd rather play music in bands with my peers as opposed to in the direction of a teacher, I became very learner-led, and that guided me all the way through my musical development. So it was just a coincidence. Why I say that is because as I've gone on and sort of tried to bring that into the world of music teaching at Ithaca, I think it's important to note that I think I'm probably less flexible and very much more rigid than many of you, so I would applaud all of you who are open to the idea of something different, because I really don't think that I am. I think I was always interested in learner-led music and at a young age, and I can't seem to think of it any other way. But there's immense value in both. That being said, when I go at Ithaca, it's important to make that point, that there's immense value in all of the musics of the world and all the pedagogies that happen. I am fortunate enough to have gone to Boston University and have met Brian then. Go Terriers! Woo! Yeah. And so Brian and I made good friends, and when he joined Little Kids Rock, it seemed natural to say, bring that to Ithaca College. It happened, and of course the students fell in love with it, and Brian all at the same time. It was really a win-win. And then the faculty were like, well, I think there's something here, because there is something here, and it has grown. And we put it in our syllabi. We've done modern band workshop in the summer. We've done popular music pedagogy in the summer. And we have it now in our student teaching. I think this is an important piece, that it somehow aligns outward from the curriculum, that it's driven upward, that maybe that we recruit the students. So if you have a student somewhere and they're interested in coming to Ithaca College to study, then talk to me. If you think we could do some work with you with student teaching placement in your schools, then talk to me. I think we can make all of that happen. And all of that is a cycle that needs us. And so the disruption points are everywhere, but if we don't do some disrupting and break it, then we'll just keep cranking out what we've always cranked out, and we'll all be the same, always. So this is awesome. And so that's just a little bit about Ithaca. Is that a good amount?
That's perfect.
Okay,
and I
perfect.
think this is Rockfest number 3?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, this is
This
Radio
is Willy
Star
Wonka
Rockfest.
Rockfest for me.
Yeah, exactly. One thing that Radio mentioned that I just want to touch on. So at LKR, we're big on acronyms. And so we said what we want to do is we want to place teachers, student teachers, music education students into settings where they can see band, choir, and orchestra, and they can also see a modern band setting, because we want our students, our future music educators, to have, as many tools in the toolbox as possible. And so the ideal student-teacher placement for me is one that is doing a traditional ensemble and a tech thing and a modern band thing and an African drumming thing. So really diverse. And so at Ithaca, this coming year, we're placing 5 of their student teachers in with New York City modern band teachers. Are any of those in the room? Okay, thank you. Just, if I ever do that again, just woo anyway, and I'll be like, thank you, yes, moving on. It'll be good. Help me out. Yeah, and so we called it the OOMPH program, the Urban Music Placement Fellowship. Even, we're giving you a little oomph. Ryan Zellner came up with it. If you don't like it, you can make fun of him. But this idea is, how do we take our most dynamic teachers and place the future music educators with those teachers to get that experience, because we know that that's how this cycle works. And then how do we work with the universities to help identify those teachers? And so this is, already happening in Tampa, and it's happening in Chicago, and it's happening in these areas. So in Texas, absolutely. So let's kind of continue this work so that we can support that. Next, we're going to take it from the States and then kind of look out. So good education, as we know, is just stealing things from other educators. We're like, that works, I'm going to do that in my classroom. And we do that a lot with you. When we think, we need to develop a vocal curriculum or hip-hop curriculum, the first place we go is to our teachers, and we look at what you're doing to learn from you and see how we can replicate that and then send it out to the teachers. And so there's an organization that you've probably been hearing out a little bit throughout the last couple of days called Musical Futures, and they are doing similar work in international contexts, and they are good friends of ours, and so we've been collaborating with them for a while. And so there are a couple folks who are their own people, but I'm going to invite them to talk together. Not at the same time, that would be awkward. And this is Anna and Ken from Musical Futures. If we can welcome them and give them a nice round of applause. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
And we'll start with Anna in just, in a couple minutes, maybe kind of tell us about your work, and then you can pass it over to Ken.
Sure, thank you. So I'm Anna. I come from the UK. My work... I have a couple of quite interesting roles. I'm the lead academic for music in Europe for an organisation called Trinity College London, and it's the oldest music examinations board in the UK. So that's a very formal music assessment process. But my other role is with Musical Futures International. Can I have a shout out, please? Musical Futures International, where are you? Thank you so much. And Musical Futures International is the expansion of Musical Futures Australia into Asia and into other parts of the world, taking all of what we've learned from both the UK and Australia and further afield out to more teachers and into more schools. I'm also chief interpreter for my colleague Ken from Australia, so if you have any issues understanding anything he's going to say, you can see me after. Anyway. So Ken and I first experienced Modern Band back in 2014. We did a Modern Band workshop with Scott in Chicago. Anyone else there? We recognise a few faces from that. And at the time, I was working as the development director for Musical Futures in the UK, and we'd been tasked to develop an approach for primary music that could be done by generalist primary teachers. That's teachers with no musical experience and no musical training, so it's a massive challenge. And the first thing that I did after I'd been to that workshop was come back. I was also teaching in a secondary school near London and took modern band into my classroom. And we unpicked it and we cherry-picked it and we used it with the kids and we absolutely loved it. And from that experience from within the classroom, that informed lots of what we then went on to develop, which was then become known as Musical Futures Just Play, which you might hear a little bit about in the next couple of days. What stood out really for me personally as an educator and also more widely in my Musical Futures work was how modern band engages the kids through really good resources and gets everybody playing together, but also the confidence and the kind of engagement I had as a teacher, quite scared of playing the guitar. After 7 hours of modern band training, I came away feeling confident enough to go back and do that in my classroom, and I think there's real value around the skilling and confidence for teachers and being able to take it back and use it. So I'm going to pass over to Ken, who can talk a little bit about Musical Futures in Australia. Here we go.
Thank you. 6 words I've heard 7 times this week, the same 6 words. Little Kids Rock saved my life. I heard it at the first person I met, I think it was Ed at Denver, and I've heard that. Why do we hear that all the time? And I think we hear that because when kids are engaged and they're excited and successful in class, they behave better. And our lives as teachers are a lot better. And I think that's really important. Of course, the kids' lives are a lot better too for doing that. So the things that I care about, I care less about the discussions about notation and styles and things. I'm more about the kids' engagement and the way we engage them. And our challenge as an organisation is access and equity across our huge geographic areas, access to instruments, training, and the resources that really changed our lives. Little Kids Rock changed our lives because, thank you, Dave, thank you, Scott, we got some resources that took us from our adolescence to enable kids to scaffold up, starting with funky jam. You know, I can play the guitar now, here we go. And the generosity of the organisation to share with us your resources, to co-write, to have us here has been amazing. And so if we're going to achieve our goals of getting to all these people I really care about people. I care about the enthusiasm of my new girlfriend, Laura here, who came all the way, the only teacher in her organisation of 40 teachers to come, and who's been joyful, has been involved, front seat and everything, playing. I've seen you up on stage doing. That's what's going to change our schools and our kids where they don't have music teachers. So that's what we care about.
That was well said. Thank you, Ken.
One more thing. I brought 14 teachers over here and I said to them, can you model your behaviour on Scott Burstein? It's created a few issues for us so far, but we're working through them.
Yeah. Quick story. I took Ken and Anna on a site visit in New York, and she says, I'm Anna, and I'm not going to do her accent. And he says, and I'm Keen. And the teacher's like, Keen. And he's like, Keen. And he's like, Keen. And Ken's like, Keen, Keen. And the teacher's like, Keen. And I'm like, his name is Ken. True story. That happened. Next up is my good friend Gareth Dillon Smith. Gareth is a rock drummer, a scholar, an educator, and someone who has a lot of perspective and involvement in modern band and popular music organizations and publications internationally. And this is his second Rockfest, and we're really excited. Please join me in welcoming Gareth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I shaved specially for today, by the way, so this is, just put that out there. Exactly. So I look different. So very briefly, my background in music and education, I suppose, I became a teacher sort of by accident. In 2001, as a very enthusiastic rock drummer, I moved to London to become rich and famous, a goal I'm still pursuing. And in order to, pay the rent, I started teaching because one had to do something. And I fell in love with it. And I started doing a master's degree in music education. Only because my girlfriend at the time was also doing a master's degree, so she was out on Monday nights, so I figured I should also do something on Mondays. And it turned out the local music education school was the Institute of Education, where somebody called Lucy Green was teaching. I didn't know who she was. She supervised my master's dissertation. and taught me some amazing things. And then she also supervised my PhD a couple of years later, because by then I'd discovered an enthusiasm for writing as well as drumming. So I sort of accidentally ended up being supervised by a legendary music education theorist and sociologist, simply because she was local and I was trying to pay the rent. But since then, anyway, I've become very interested in scholarship around music education, and especially sociology of music education, and particularly popular music, because that's what I love playing the most and listening to the most. I've taught drums for about 10 years in various schools. I was a peripatetic drum teacher. I visited 17 schools per week for 2 years, which was too many in hindsight, but it just about worked. And I taught general music, as I discovered it was called, in a primary school for 6 years, and then taught in high schools as well, teaching popular music ensembles, because that's what they asked me to do. I'm now the editor with Brian of the Journal of Popular Music Education, to which everybody is welcome to submit a paper, please. And I was recently elected to the position of president of the Association for Popular Music Education. So I feel people think I'm quite important in some contexts, which is a little bit scary since it all happened by accident. But I'm trying to take it very seriously and do the best I can. The things that particularly interest me, I said I like sociology, which means I'm really interested in how we can better understand the ways in which meaning and value shape music in schools. So music means things to people or doesn't mean things to people, and people value all kinds of things for different reasons. There's always politics involved, there are cultural assumptions, there are personal assumptions, and I'm really trying very hard to understand how those things, how understanding the bigger picture, the smaller picture, can inform teacher training and teacher education and music performance and a range of things. So yeah, there's a project I've been working on recently that, well, it's called punk pedagogies. I found myself in punk bands in London, which was quite a lot of fun. Yeah, it's good fun, you know. As you can tell, I tend to talk quickly. I also like to play the drums really quickly. I like to drive fast. I'm quite impatient. I think that's what it is. So, and this, I never really liked punk music. My dad told me it was rubbish, so I believed him. And then it's great fun to play because it's really quick, you know. So I got really involved in playing punk music and got involved with the Punk Scholars Network, which is a Facebook group everybody can join if you want to. So the Punk Scholars Network I found it to be quite helpful and interesting. And I just finished editing a book about punk pedagogies with some amazing people. So the punk piece has kind of helped me understand who I am and who lots of people are, I think, in music and education. There are a few sort of key characteristics of punk that have come through the book. It's inherently disruptive. Punks like to question everything, regardless of what they're told. They're always oppositional from the get-go. So whatever you tell me, I don't believe you, you're wrong, because I have a right to question it. It's inherently DIY. People resist help if you can do it yourself, with some friends, but there's an element of wanting to do it yourself. There's an element of kind of entrepreneurship in there, and there's some aggression and destruction, often self-destruction. And it's very critical, and there's also, because of those things, punk's very empowering. It can be very empowering for individuals and groups. So I'm really interested at the moment in the possibilities of what punk pedagogy might mean. It's quite scary as a teacher, actually, because you're taking power away from teachers, giving it to students, which is also, of course, very empowering at the same time. It's exciting and thrilling and dangerous. So I'm very interested in that at the moment. And I think that's enough, isn't it? Okay.
Thank you, Gareth. And yes, thank you.
Sorry, I haven't finished, actually. It turns out I hadn't finished. I've nearly finished. I think, so the sociological piece, I find I ask a lot of questions and I very rarely have any answers, which I'm looking for answers, but I think that's a punk thing and it's a vulnerable thing and it's exciting to ask lots of questions. So anyway, there we go. Sorry, Brian, for interrupting.
Yeah, no, thanks. And I think we already clapped for once. That's enough. Gareth's interest in sociology, he explained it to me one time we were talking, and once you see music education through a sociological lens, you can't unsee it. And it's like certain things, if you're looking at something and then you spot something and then you can't unsee that thing. And so as we look at ideas and kind of these sociological perspectives about access and equity and diversity and who music is for and barriers to participation in music, it's like we can't, and we know that because we're doing the work in the classroom. and that's always kind of stuck with me. And this is a great transition to our last speaker. If you've been in graduate school in the last 7 years, chances are you were assigned Sociology and Music Education by Ruth Wright. It is a seminal text up there with many others in music ed. We'll leave that there. And so Ruth is a professor of music at Western, which is in Canada. Canadians in the house? Thank you, good. I'm glad I prefaced the just woo and we can move on. So we are really excited to have Ruth here. She's also doing work with Musical Futures in Canada and has a large portfolio of scholarship and is also excited to be here, and maybe we'll get her on stage tonight to rock out. Maybe. So please join me in welcoming Ruth Wright.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's been a real privilege to be here for these days and to see the work and the energy that I'm going into Little Kids Rock. I'm going to take a slightly different tack to my colleagues in that I'm going to contextualize the experiences and the developments they've been introducing by talking about a few of the arguments that academics like me are making to support this work. And I'm hoping through that to continue to allow you to better understand the role that modern band is playing in reshaping music education. So I'm going to talk, first of all, very briefly, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, so forgive me, but I'm going to talk a little bit about why perhaps music education has needed to be reshaped and how modern band contributes to this. And I'm going to do it from the field that I'm most comfortable in, which is the sociology of music education. I was drawn to sociology because I've always had a really strong concern with social justice. In fact, most recently, I've been positioning my work within a field that the sociologist Eric Olin Wright, no relationship, calls emancipatory social science, or if you're one of my students in Canada, emancipatory social science, but I can't seem to get that right. And the goals of that are to generate knowledge which is relevant to challenging human oppression and to help create conditions in which people can live flourishing lives. Now, how does this relate to music education, you might say? Oppression is a pretty big word to use in relation to something like music education. And can we say that music ed really affects the extent to which people can live flourishing lives? Well, I'm sure, as I said, that I'm preaching to the choir here, but let's just think about this for a bit from an academic argument point of view. If we can demonstrate that current social institutions and structures cause systematic harm to people, then we could say that they are sources of oppression. We know that education is a societal institution and that music education is an institution within this that has its own structures and power balances. Can we say that this societal institution of music education and its structures causes systematic harm? Are they sources of oppression? Well, I want to backtrack a little bit here and return to the work of Blacking, How Musical is Man? If any of you did music ed degrees, you'll have read his work. He was an anthropologist who studied the musicality of an African tribe called the Venda. And in his tradition, anthropologists have been continuing his work and showing that we can't find a society without music, that we need music, that being human is being musical. In fact, music is so powerful that we can even twist it and use it for torture in some cases. Now let's go to Article 29 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, which is Goals of Education. That states that children's education should develop each child's personality, talents, and abilities to the fullest. So let's join those two together. If we agree that we are all musical, that we have a need for music, and that we have a right to an education that develops all of our talents and abilities, then diverse, personally and culturally relevant music education that develops the musical talents and abilities of all young people and equips them to continue making music throughout their lifespan should be a human right. As I said, I knew I was preaching to the choir here. So the extent to which we provide this education should be a measure of a socially just society. So harm in this case would be a failure to provide this sort of music education. So let's ask ourselves how well we've been doing that. And we've heard many times over the past few days this statistic of the 20% we reach and the 80% who somehow walk away from us. And yet we know from a vast body of research that young people are intensely engaged with music outside of school. Could it be, and this is where this gets a bit edgy, could it be that our previous largely unquestioning acceptance of the superiority of Western art music, its ensembles, canons, and pedagogies, has excluded students who can't recognize themselves, their musics, or their ways of learning in these offerings? That we see the same demographic entering higher music education and becoming music teachers. We have been perhaps teaching to reproduce ourselves through our unexamined values. So previous models of music education might be seen as structures of oppression and exclusion. In other words, they are institutional causes of harm. They cause harm to young people who are innately musical and who are excluded from a music education that is culturally and personally relevant and speaks to their individual musicality, that fails to provide them with the belief in their own ability and the musical skills and understandings they need to take that music education with them through the doors of educational institutions and forward into a lifetime of music making. Now, a number of scholars have been suggesting that the only way this is going to change is if we radically and critically examine the very ideologies and cultural values we take as common sense in our thinking about music education. Modern band and other movements like Musical Futures in the UK, Australia, and Canada, and elsewhere, which my colleagues have been talking about, are examples of what can happen when we do this rethink. They move from placing students in passive roles in the reproduction of works largely from the Western art music canon to becoming active agents in their own learning. They foreground and respect the culture of the young people they serve, and they equip them to be creative and musically autonomous beings who understand what it is to be musical individually and with and alongside others in genres they recognize and respect. They are underpinned by an ethos of diversity, inclusion, and lifelong musical learning and participation, in which the end goal is not the production of technically virtuosic elite musicians, but of a musically rich and active population. I've nearly finished, Brian. If we want to rid music education and even the arts in society more generally of labels such as elitist and exclusive, and perhaps even irrelevant, we have to look to such models of music education. The sociologist, musicologist, and educator Christopher Small, 40 years ago this year, wrote a very influential book called Music, Society, Education. In this, he very provocatively said that music is too important to be left to the musicians. The problem is perhaps not that music is largely left to the musicians currently, which it is, but it lies in how we define who is a musician. Our education should enable us all to see ourselves as musicians. I think the future of music education, which is looking somewhat dicey in a number of certainly institutions of higher education on many continents, the future of music education may hinge on the extent to which we can do this. It will require us to reshape our core values in music education towards enabling everyone in society to do music as well as possible for as long as possible. And I think modern band is one of the very helpful approaches that might just help us to do that. Thank you.
Now you see why we put Ruth at the end. I mean, as Scott and I were talking about people to invite, and I reached out to Ruth, and she said, "Yeah, I'd love to come." Scott was like, Wait, she said yes? Like we knew then how lucky we were, and that goes for every panelist that we have here. So I'm going to give them one kind of final word, and then I'm going to give them a moment to think about it. We've been talking a lot, kind of in some of our higher ed gatherings, and then just informally about opportunities and challenges. So I would love to just kind of rapid fire go down the line, and I'm going to give you a moment to think, and you can address either, but I'll limit it to 30 seconds. Either what is an opportunity that Modern Band provides, or what is a challenge that you see that we might need to address. And I'm going to give them 30 seconds to think about that, and just kind of try to wrap it up with a quick anecdote. When I first met Dave, and I was chatting with him, and we started talking about higher ed, which was a passion of mine, he said, you know, one of my goals is to go out of business. And I said, well, that's a funny goal. And he said, you know, if our colleges and universities are preparing teachers to do culturally relevant, culturally responsive, learner-led programs, then you don't need a nonprofit to come in and teach them how to do it, because they're going to get this education in college, and they can do it over 4 years and not just over one weekend. And I said that totally makes sense. And so the Modern Band movement needs teachers doing it, and doing it at a high level, and students who then become music educators, and they do it in student placements, and we need cultural arts organizations on board, and we need our higher education partners, and there's no one way to kind of get this movement where we want it. And so it's exciting for me when I see our higher ed folks talking with our state art supervisors who are talking to K-12 teachers, and it's a true community. There's no separation there. We're all in this together. I think that was enough time. So we're just gonna rapid fire go down the line, and either challenge or an opportunity in 30 seconds. Yes, Dave. Sure, so what Dave said is another option. Who is not here in this room that should be? Okay, here we go. Oh, you have a mic now, great.
I think the biggest challenge for me, I want to follow up with the student-teacher thing that Radio and Brian were both talking about. You know, what happens is, at least where I am right now, we're sending our student teachers to golden places. I mean, these programs are perfect, and there's no essence of anything new or innovative about them. It's all, you know, this word that, this kind of word that we've all been talking about, traditional. And for me, it's not just about providing student-teacher experiences in Modern Band, but also providing diverse observation assignments, and where they should go out and get these experiences prior to student teaching, because we all know that their first job is not going to be at that school. Their first job is probably going to be you know, maybe in an urban setting, or a place that they haven't had much experience, or, you know, any experience at all. And so that's really where I see the biggest challenge, where I'm teaching, and why I really want to follow up with the student-teacher placements. So if any of you want to send or want to work with some of my student teachers, I would love that. So see me just like Radio.
So I'm going to actually piggyback on that, but talk about an opportunity. Actually, what I'm seeing the opportunity is for us to be able to place student teachers. This is growing like wildfire. To place student teachers with Little Kids Rock or Modern Band trained teachers, so that when they graduate, they already have this skill set. And so we're creating that ripple effect. And I would actually like to say that we just graduated our first group of fully trained LKR graduates from Miami-Dade teachers. So the ripple is happening. So opportunity is there.
I would have to say, as a closet rock guitarist in middle school, personally, what you guys are doing as teachers to create environments for people like myself, when I was back in middle school, to play in ska bands, to play in punk rock bands, to play in these different types of genres and styles. I quit band, I'm gonna be honest with you. I was a saxophone player, and it's all good. I love all of it. But what you guys are doing is so important and so valuable to the field of music education, so that you're creating environments where students like me, because there's a lot of them out there, that need places to make music in school, to take the music that they're learning on their own outside of school and put it into school. And I think that's so great. So I'm going to go with a positive.
the positives far outweigh the negatives, but some of the negatives are, I think we need more technology in what we're doing here. The music needs to be much more forward-looking, not backwards-looking, not rock and roll, and the music that I guess some of the people in this room love. So I think tech and in beyond music engagement through modalities that are not strings and keys and drums, but something else, special learners, people with needs, more diversity, although this is a much more diverse group of music educators and art. I think we need more diversity in this room at all ages and colors. Muchos idiomas diferentes también es muy importante también. And I think that what we need is in the room, if we could bring them, and I know they can be a little challenging at times, but children, because I think they have much more to tell us than we do to each other.
Okay, so mine is an opportunity. I'll carry on. An opportunity which is around something I'd be very interested in, both involvement with Modern Band and also through Musical Futures. It's in communities coming together around something that we all believe in really strongly. It's in the group of the 14 Aussie teachers that are over there who we've got to know over the last few years. And it's not just in face-to-face events like this where you kind of see and really feel and understand the strength of those beliefs and what brings people together to share those, but also in the online communities as well, where the conversations continue and people continue to share what's happened afterwards, which makes the value of this sustainable and something which can continue and continue to have value for the children that we all work with. And I think we could probably sum that value up in one very simple sentence, is that probably everybody in this room and beyond that who buys into what we're trying to do is to say we would like more people to make more music for longer. And I think that's just such a strong message that comes out from Modern Band, from Musical Futures and from other organisations, and it's something that I think is a real strength and opportunity of what we're doing.
So you're talking about leadership, and I think that's the key issue for what we have here. We are all leaders. We're growing the next generation of musicians, kids and leaders, and we have leadership for ourselves. We get from these organisations, and Dave and others. I'd like to see in this room the Prime Minister of Australia as a leader. I'd like to see our spiritual leader, David Price, who created Musical Futures with us. And I think that our challenge is to lead the communities we have. It must be enormous, the communities we have access to here, lead them on, and I think that's our key challenge.
So this is a challenge, but I think it's probably more of an opportunity. They can be very similar if you frame them the right way. So there's an opportunity, I think, all of us in the room understand the value and impact of Modern Band programs. So I think there's a challenge and an opportunity around evaluating the value and impact of the programs and getting a sense of really what it's doing and messaging that impact and effectiveness to policymakers on a state and national level. I think it's a huge ambition, but I think it's essential because what Ruth was saying, I don't want to tread on your toes, but there are sort of cultural assumptions and ideological assumptions that underpin underpin our lives. I was speaking with Tarek yesterday from the who was up here earlier. Sorry, from Elmer. Thank you. Thank you. And then he was saying that there are no questions about. Of course, you have basketball in school. Of course, you have football. Of course, you have these things. But everyone's like, well, why do you want music? So there are. You can change those assumptions. It's a big project, but I think it's about messaging the impact and effectiveness of music education that's good, and then just people assuming it's a good. So.
I think you've heard more than enough from me already this morning. Let's discuss.
I think they would disagree.
Well, just piggybacking on what Gareth said, I had breakfast this morning with, is it Shelley and her husband? And she was telling me that her school is changing from a sports school to a music school because of her Modern Band programme. So, woo! Yeah. All right.
Excellent.
So my job as a sociologist then is always to be the voice of doom, isn't it? But I would just raise a caution. Be careful of becoming a method, because once something becomes a method, it becomes solidified and then it stops growing and changing and responding to the people it's serving. So keep alive like you are now and keep responsive.
Thank you, Ruth. I want to end just briefly with kind of a call to action. You know your higher ed institutions probably better than we do. And so it's not rocket science how this happens. People say, oh, hey, I know this music ed professor who would be totally open to doing this. I went to Fredonia and there's this person doing ukulele, and so I called Jill Reese and she's here. We have people who went to Eastman. I mean, I'm a New York guy. So when I hear Crane School of Music, think about where you went, where you have relationships, and if there are colleges, institutions, universities who would be really open to this, let me know. Like, let's start that dialogue, because when you have a strong, I mean, just look at Tampa. When you have a strong university presence in the city where you're doing things, that really supports the work that you're doing, because they're going to prepare students who then go into your school district. So you have colleagues who are doing similar things. So I wouldn't have been able to get into FIU unless we had a connection. And so friends, your universities, let's talk and let's think about where the opportunities are, and then talk to us so that we can try to, because that's where we know those rich, fertile grounds are going to be. The schools where you came out of, let's try to work with them. So if we can join one more time in thanking our panelists, and then I'm going to hand it over to Dave.